All right, everybody, we are back again for another episode of Life After Ball with the Coach's Compass. We got Doherty with us and we got Tara with us again today, talking a little bit more about cortisol, testosterone, the cause of lower training loads, and my needs list. But first, before we jump into it, wanted to give a big shout out and tell one of my former employees, coworkers. His name is Juan. He just officially announced that he has overcome kind of the fight of depression after 4 years of being done with playing football. He played at Austin P, played a little bit of time in arena football. He also was coaching with us here at D1. He was a coach over at Maplewood High School here, a local school in the Nashville area. And he was fighting depression throughout those 4 years of being with us. And he just announced the other day that he's kind of come out of it on the other side and feeling a lot better. And just want to let him know that, hey, you're not in this fight alone, man. Like, there's a lot of us going through what you're going through. And I like the courage that you had to come out on social media to say what you were fighting through those 4 years. I'm happy for you. And again, I know it's not the end of the road, right? Because those things come in waves. And if you ever need any support or anything like that, bro, like, my line is always open. I'm here for you. I'm only 6 months released from it all, but I know what you're going through with the whole process because it's a tricky one. But again, we'll jump into today and we'll talk a little bit about this Coops needs list, right? So we talked last time about, what I needed in a work environment coming into the real world. So I kind of sat down and put it together. First was a competitive environment, just because that's what I'm used to being in. A room for growth and a plan of strategy towards that. So what is my trajectory of like where I can go in the company, how I'm going to grow in it, what is going to be the end goal, what am I striving for? Team environment. Now, team environment is also a little bit tricky because if you're in a high leadership role, you are also in control of building that team and also keeping the team together. So I think that one's a little bit tricky, but a team environment is always something that, us former players are looking for. And time to work out and time away. So just having a time to block out myself, to not have to think about working and just being able to do my own workout and however I want to work out. And then time away. So when I'm away, not having to worry about work, being able to spend time, whether it's with my daughter, with my family, with my friends, or on my vacation, and not have to worry about answering emails, answering texts. That was something that I went through with the last company I was with. Christmas Eve was getting emails. Christmas Day was getting texts. I was at a funeral, was getting texts about something to do with work. And I'm like, this just isn't the time or place for all of that. So that was kind of my needs list. I don't know if you guys want to jump into that one and kind of how to piece that together.
Well, I'm happy to take this a little bit if you're okay with that. So I think we're going to back up your needs list a little bit to just kind of discuss, I think, for a moment, like the ideology of stress or essentially kind of how stress affects the body and your needs, essentially. What you're describing, I will say up front, is what you've essentially asked for, Coop, is for stuff not to really change from when you played in some fashion. Like, change is hard. And change creates a stressor response. And what we're asking for is essentially what some of the biggest catalysts for depression and struggle after sport are, and physiologically how those manifest. So what you're asking for, let's just make it real simple, is not to change so much, because you emotionally, mentally, psychologically, physiologically are going to reel from that. You're going to struggle from that. And that is true. And I can speak to that from a physiological perspective, is that incredible shift in your environment, in your routine, all of those types of things can produce a significant stress response. So let's just make it simple. You want it to be as close to what it was before. And that's a sound and strong need and a good need. And so how do you do that so that the stress response to you is less? And that's why depression, anger issues, depression, and eventually sort of a really apathetic kind of failure to thrive state can take place after retirement from sport, or really anything where you've had a really large and huge involvement, but it's particularly sport because there's such a physiological cost to the change with training and when you stop that training. So I was just going to, say in the work that I do, like I deal essentially with stress management and managing and mitigating those stressor response so that people can thrive. It's really important to note right out of the gate that a lot of the behaviors that people exhibit when they retire from sport or in sport or whatever are physiologically driven. They're not character judgments. They're not like, Coop's just a bad dude or a this or a that. He just can't control his emotions. There's so much that goes on with the training load and the changes that take place that really really alter your physiology so you can participate and perform at a really high level. When you change that radically, expect that the body's going to go into revolt. And that does lead to several what we call vegetative shifts, which are changes in behavior, cravings, sleep patterns, everything that sends you into a flux. And if you're not identifying those quickly, and understanding that's what's going on, you can put it on yourself, and other people around you can put it on you. You're just a crybaby. You're not, you were spoiled there. You are, like you just got to get over yourself. No, you're actually dealing with a physiological condition that's not unlike diabetes. And so I think it's important for us to talk about that. And I certainly can speak to that. That is what I deal with day to day in my job and in my research in school. So I can say you're an echo and validate that you need for a number of reasons the same type of stimulus to keep you healthy, to keep you working, keep you moving forward. And the less change to that stimulus from a training, from an environmental, psychological, social, emotional, every perspective, the better you will fare when you retire physiologically, which will also drive the behavior set. So I can say that, and if you want, I can explain it, but I'll let Georgie comment first. If any of that even made any sense whatsoever.
It made completely sense. And also, I actually want to back that up, which I usually tend to not separate the mental health, the stress part of it, from the physical part of it. Kind of what Tara already mentioned, because no matter what psychological imbalance or mental imbalance, whether that be stress or just in general, I don't feel good in this situation. I can't make any decisions all of a sudden. I don't feel happy. I feel a little bit anxiety. I feel frustrated. Whatever that might be, might also, with a really pretty high guarantee, be something in the physical part, which is the neurochemistry as well. So yeah, in terms of the cortisol, in terms of the hormones, in terms of whatever genetically we're disposed from, which means that how well do you actually metabolize the cortisol produced or released. So there's a lot of things that I also do know that not everybody has access to get that measured or get that support in terms of it. But just to back up what Tara said is that I would always make sure not to change too much, no matter if you just retire or if you just feel stressed. Make sure that you can navigate it within that. But first of all, look at what on a physical level do I need to make sure at the minimum is still intact.
Yeah.
And that means obviously, which I also know you're probably going to ask later on, but what would that necessarily look like? What would I need to be aware of? Which we can discuss going
Guys,
forward.
hit
Yeah.
it. Y'all jump into it. I want to know how you is navigate this, because you're wanting a high performing person that's coming from high performance places, but then not all companies can promise like this level of competitiveness that we're looking for, and actually be aware of the stressors that we're coming down from, and then how to get past that and actually allow people this time to kind of, and not too much change, because I think that's what we talk about in the real world. Like, how do we avoid that too much change, but then again, not seen as crybabies or somebody that's been handed stuff all the time, but that like we've worked really hard to get in that position, and that's just like what we're used to. So how do we continue that on?
Well, I think
Sounds good.
sorry, go ahead.
Sorry. No, sorry. Go ahead.
Well, I think if it's okay, maybe this is like nerdy and boring, but I think we need a little science lesson to first of all set the stage, if that would be okay with you. And I'll keep it as simple.
100%, because I want to learn a little bit more today.
Okay, so if we could just I'll keep it as simple a language as possible. But people are probably going to wake up from this and go, oh my gosh, that's me, and this is how I'm feeling right now. And then there's the now what? Now what do we do about it? So essentially, I can say really simply, I'm holding this mug for a reason. Stress is stress. The body doesn't know where it's coming from necessarily. It doesn't say, oh, that's a good stressor, that's a bad stressor. It just knows it can hold this much or it can't. So when my cup is full, it's full. So whether that was, I got a new puppy, great, amazing, love the new puppy. If I got a new job, if I have a wonderful new significant other, if I had something bad happen, the response to, your body doesn't know where that stress is coming from. It just knows it can handle or it can't. So that's sort of lesson number one. So once it's full, it's full. So a lot of folks will misjudge their stress load. They'll say, I've got so many great things. Yeah, but it just might be too much. You might be carrying too much. And so we'll get into the science now. So when you have something happen to you, like a stressor response of some sort, good cortisol, let me just clarify, is a really good thing. It is something that really does a great job to help you get through a difficult thing. Lift the car off the baby, squat heavy, play that game, get through that period of exams, deal with a new puppy, whatever it is. It's released to do good things. It is released to help liberate a lot of fat, burn, so you have a lot of energy to get through that. It boosts your immunity. It helps you be very cognitively dialed in, sort of you can suddenly think of those solutions. I know what to do. I know how to get through this particular situation. I can fight that bear. I know how to get the car off that baby. Like I can do all of those things. It is meant to be a good thing. It helps you get through the workout. It liberates energy, boosts your immunity, all those things. Okay. So that's the most simplistic way I can say it. Cortisol is a good thing. It's meant to be, it will help you get through these things, but then that tap of cortisol is meant to be turned off. Then you're meant to rest and digest. Okay. So you go up into your fight or flight, and that fight can be or flight can be something that's not, fairly benign sounding to the rest of the world, but you go and you do your thing and then you rest and digest. That's how the body is meant to work. It does its thing, it rests and digests. It does its thing, it rests and digests. What happens when you go from thing to thing to thing and you never turn off that tap? You're from, I've got this job, I've got this family issue, I've got this and that, or whatever. I've got this accumulated, I'm always running. That tap doesn't turn off. And so eventually the body becomes desensitized to its benefits. And what happens then, like insulin insensitivity, when you're a diabetic, like your body's insensitive to the insulin. So it's like that. You can become cortisol insensitive, and in which case the opposite starts to happen. You start to hang on to that body fat. Instead of burning fat, you're holding on to it. Instead of having, you start to present in a way that your immune system is not doing its job. You're injured all the time. You can't heal from injuries. You're sore all the time. You're picking up bugs. You seem to be that person that goes from injury to injury to injury, thing to thing to thing. It's like you're never clearing the inflammation. You're always kind of brittle because, inflammation in the body does make things really brittle. Again, very simplistic language I'm using here. I can dig into the actual pathway of that and all that, but I'm just keeping it as easy to understand as possible. Mentally, you start to become, completely short-term, long-term memories start to change. You suddenly can't remember where the keys are. You can't remember how to tie your shoes. Like it affects your memory and your cognition. So imagine how that affects your ability to learn, not just from a cognitive perspective, but a motor learning is delayed as well. So you're that guy on the field that is like, why is he still running the wrong direction? Like, I told him to do this, like, do that. Like, motor learning gets affected. And so in that particular way, when you're dealing with that, you're cognitively not in the right zone. And essentially you can progress, basically 3 consecutive days of a disruption in certain sort of what we call vegetative behaviors or shifts signal that your cortisol, you're accumulating it, and you might be trending down a path that might send you in the wrong direction. And so as practitioners, coaches, sports scientists, all the stuff that are working on a team, we pay attention to that every day. We have something called a Hooper-McKinnon, a wellness inventory, lots of different things. I've got my own that we use to monitor what's going on with an athlete. And this can apply to everybody. 3 consecutive days of things like disrupted sleep. So vegetative behaviors are sleeping, eating, mood, even your cravings, your urges of whatever I want to, I want to train, I don't, I want to see this person, I don't, like what's driving your behaviors. 3 days of disrupted eat, sleeping, moods, and so forth. And I'll explain what those are in a moment, signal that this is happening. And for for the athlete, for the coach, for everybody, it means the training volume needs to change, or the intensity change, or something needs to change in the environment. So I'll scale that to bigger examples a little bit later around changing, this is a small example of what's going on in, say, the training environment, but this has large scale applicability, and it left untreated, like unrecognized, untreated, like unmanaged in a long term, it can have more deleterious effects. So what are those signs and symptoms that you're in this place? Well, disrupted sleep, a quality of sleep, length of sleep, flipping around your bed, not getting to sleep, always waking up, things like that. Or it could be a combination. It doesn't have to be all these signs and symptoms. It can be one or another. It can be mood shifting. So mood shifts from irritable, you can't stand the sound of someone's breathing, like you just are so angry you want to punch them in the face, to like everything irritates you, like you're constantly on edge, to that slides left unchecked, that slides to depression. So it's a continuum on the hormonal scale. So I'm painting a picture here of what happens with physiologically, not just somebody's, again, a lot of people make the mistake of judging the character of someone when this is sort of scientifically driven oftentimes, right? So everybody can end up in this place. It doesn't matter if you're the smartest, bravest, kindest, whatever person, you can be annoyed by someone's breathing and be really angry and not be able to help it, to depression. And then eventually a farther and a more confusing sign for people is apathy, as in that they don't care about anything. And so a lot of times people mistake that place as like, oh my gosh, like Tara, she's just like water off a duck's person. A bomb could go off around her and she doesn't care. Like she's just so easygoing. But sometimes that's a pathophysiological place versus a good place. And so, it's like you're apathetic. You don't care about anything. You don't have emotions. You're like, if I ate today, great. If I didn't eat, great. There's discernments needed to know if this is a maladaptation or a positive adaptation. Cravings, like suddenly you want to eat all the sugar or all the Doritos, or you want nothing but fast food, or you want to drink a lot, like alcohol or drugs, or cravings for unusual behaviors. So case in point, I won't say who, but I helped a swim team, a very high level swim team from your country, Coop, that that had been through an enormously difficult training block, and it was exams, and they were meant to go to a big competition, and they had inexplicably, like, a whole bunch of the athletes just went crazy, like, and I'd given this presentation to their coaching staff about what to look for and what we were going to do to manage it, and it was kind of like serendipitous because I gave the presentation and they allowed them to stop and pause versus expelling them. They did some not good things, like they very out of character behaviors where they, I won't say what they did, but let's say they did sort of really not good things that could get them kicked off a team. And on top of that, their swimming went flat. Like they weren't swimming well, like they were completely flat. And so it was a 911 to kind of deal with this. And what happened was we dealt with it with fuel, some supplementation, a complete overhaul of their training, because this was now 2 weeks out from a big competition. So it looked like they weren't going to, A, they weren't performing, and B, they weren't going to be able to go on behavioral, because of behavioral consequences. But it was so profound what happened to them, an extreme training block that they weren't handling. But there was also the cup was over full. There was exams, there was a lot going on in the university. There was a whole confluence of factors that came together that overflowed their cups essentially. And now they're in this crisis place. So within 2 weeks, with some very careful work around when they're fueling, how they're fueling, some other interventions, some things that we can talk about, they came out of it and they went and they swam well. 2 weeks. So imagine if no one dealt with that. So that's the scenario to talk about. So say it was like you're expelled. Okay, so now there's another stressor. I'm kicked out of university, I'm kicked off the team or something. So say that wasn't managed. And then it kept going. And now this person's more stressed and it's untreated. Now we've got a more chronic, pervasive issue, and that person has gone off on an island that is, they never were meant to be there in the first place. And if I could count the number of, I had even a penny for every time I saw this happen in sport, where that led to someone quitting altogether, where that led to someone just completely imploding, I'd be a millionaire. Like, I honestly have seen it so many times, but I've also been on the very blessed side of being able to intervene and turn it around like I did there, or I helped to do there. Okay, so and what I'm illustrating here is there's a very powerful physiological thing that goes on that can lead people down a very bad path that doesn't need to happen. And especially I've seen this in growth and development, in developing athletes that are sort of in their teens, and particularly doing very key points of growth and development when their prefrontal cortex is being rewired and they're struggling so much just with growing. And how many people drop out of sport at that time because they just can't manage. So I've had sort of I guess a platform to have athletes come to see me before they make that critical decision. Is it a decision that you just need to make anyway? Is that the right decision, or are you just super crushed and you've just had too many things go on and your cups overflow? And I would say 95% of the time it's been the latter. They're crushed. So, that's led me down the road of my research and training methodology, understanding sort of the physiological cost of of living under the umbrella of pro sport, of elite sport. Like there's so many other factors, and that needs to be factored into the training load. It needs to be factored into the training load. It needs, and which is what I help coaches do now, is factored into the training load. Can they do that for each individual athlete? Not necessarily, but the awareness for the athlete and those that are in their lives, the key stakeholders on that journey, is really, really important. Like people that know you, having a tight circle that says, you know what? Coop's not meant to join the circus. He just told me last Saturday that he feels a real calling to join the circus. There's nothing wrong with the circus, but that is so out of character for him. What's going on with Coop? Let's rewind what's happening. He has, with this going on, that going on. His training load is this. Is his, like, can we sort of dig deep into your symptoms? Can we see that this has been going on for a little while? And what does Coop need? He may need to lay around and eat a ton. If he's got energetic fatigue, there may be autonomic nervous system, like fatigue. There's maybe some things to deal with, in which case certain types of training would be off limits. You may need different types, and in 3, 4, 5 days, he may be like, oh my gosh, why would I join the circus? Like you may snap out of it because it's that powerful physiologically. So I'm painting a picture of, now let's scale that to how what went on in football training for football and all the stuff you were balancing, and that might explain some of the injuries, the chronic issues, the up and down performance, the I'm great, I'm not great, just never being able to maintain that consistency, to now you're done sport. And now you've got a whole other stimulus you're dealing with and a whole bunch of other stressors. So is the number one, the transition and how you transition out of sport could be really critical to making sure that you don't end up in this physiological state. If you're there, understanding it, recognizing it, and making sure that somebody's on board to say, you know what, like you've gone on a completely different path. You don't even know who you are anymore. And maybe that's why people are quitting their marriages. Like maybe there's, what, radical decisions. Suddenly I don't have a family anymore. Suddenly I am a completely different person. Like I'm fairly confident, and that's not being arrogant, that I could trace the physiological root of that and go, if we hadn't dealt with this, we could be in a different place. And so in speaking to some medical professionals, I mentioned, sorry, that I ran into a doctor that works with one of the pro teams in the US, and has said, like, trying really hard to track with the changes physiologically in people, like the stressor response when they retire or in the season, and then how to manage it when they get out of the season so they don't end up in such a bad place, like in depression or worse, sort of in dead end jobs or relational discord, or doing those types of things that I described a team could do in a more chronic way. So I'll paint that picture for you, that it's that profound, and it needs to be identified, and it needs to be managed not only in teams, so which is what something I'm trying to help people do. I'm doing that with a big team right now in Canada, and figuring this out because they were really underperforming, and a lot of it has been the opposite of what the coaches would think. We gotta train them harder. We got to do more. A lot of it's been less. A lot of it's been less and different, and a different stimulus. And now they're performing. It wasn't that we changed who they were. They didn't have to be smarter. They didn't have to be whatever. In fact, we had to do less, and we had to do it differently. And so now suddenly they're getting results. And it's like, oh my gosh, why didn't we know this sooner? And so giving them tools to recognize what's going on. But if they can't recognize it because they're in it, who else can do that? So I have a pretty strong opinion about what happens to athletes when they retire and what drives their behavior, um, and um, and what goes on in sport. And I think that there's a lot to be done just by recognizing this, and recognizing overreaching, which could progress to overtraining. But honestly, in my work that I've done in cardiovascular stuff with cardiac rehab and whatnot, and no matter how people get there, the end goal or the end condition physiologically is the same, whether they've gotten there through, an athlete's no different than a burnt out CEO, or physiologically they present the exact same way. They have the same struggles. They just don't see them the same way. And the judgments around those, unfortunately, are not the same. Oh, you're just a burnt out CEO versus you're just a spoiled athlete who doesn't get to play anymore. No, you actually may be in a physiological condition that's driving this behavior, and you can't help it, and you need real support. So I'll stop there. I could talk about this till next Friday and still not be done. It's something I'm extremely passionate about, and I've just seen too many bad things happen where people have lost careers that didn't need to happen. People have been under, had some gone on to some bad places they didn't need to be. Now, I'm not I'm not speaking. I don't know the beginning from the end. I'm not God. I don't know. Sometimes these things happen and they lead you to incredible places, but I've witnessed that the journey doesn't have to be this hard. A lot of people don't have the experiences they hope for in sport, let alone out of sport, because there's this lack of recognition and understanding, and people make false judgments about their character. And instead of going, you know what, you have a condition and we need to actually just do, X, Y, and Z. So I'll stop there and let you guys talk. Sorry, I'm like,
I will back up on that by saying that I feel like in sport, in not necessarily professional sport, but in most elite sport, I feel like 99% is probably struggling in some chronic level of stress. And I also do believe that they are actually also addicted to that chaos, which in college, for instance, there's school, there's exams, there's like running around. And I feel like some of these athletes, they actually like it at the same time as they're trying to kind of survive in it. So I feel like that there should obviously be much more support in this on an early stage, because if that has been the most of your life until you then retire, then obviously how do I know not to have all this stress? How do I know not to be under pressure all the time? And if I suddenly don't feel it, I feel weird, or I feel this frustration, and I feel a lot of emotions I haven't felt before because I've just been fighting them off or training them off or whatever. And with that, what I would definitely, that is kind of my mission in this, is to, because I still get really, I would say, shocked, not surprised, because I'm over that now. I get shocked how bad any kind of sport, the biggest sports facilities, the richest clubs in the world in any sport, I'm just so surprised how little they know about nutrition in terms of preparing them on a cognitive level, which means nurturing the brain, and how little they know what the bad nutrition and diet people are eating and they are offering, because that affects so much in terms of the cortisol. And that also, again, will lead us back to, if we have this specific athlete who has some certain gene variations like COND or bad methylation, then this person might not actually be really good at metabolizing that cortisol spike. And by having that extra, what's it called, like extra challenge on the genetic level,
yeah.
and then being offered this horrible, which I really mean horrible diet, and then you expect to go in and at the same time have a good recovery, because you're not going to sleep well either. So you're not going to recover. You're not going to be able to function well on a mental level, which means you're going to have a lot of mental errors, which means you're going to come back with a lot of self-blame, and the rabbit hole just starts in that. Exactly.
And then,
So
and then,
we're back to like, what comes first then? Yeah, well, for firstly, you should figure out how to at least feed the plant right, so it can actually execute on what you expect them to do. Because what comes first? Is it the diet? Is it the environment that they put the athletes into? Because it is, for me, I think it's the facility, it's the club's responsibility in that time, that when they actually have the athlete, they could obviously train the athlete in knowing what to look for or knowing how to fuel themselves. And I do believe seriously that a lot of the stress that they come out with is also based on a really bad recovery, a really bad diet, and all these things that they have not been taken care of as well.
yeah, I 100%. And so that's, I want to say too, just around kind of things that happen. So how do we know we're there? And if you've got that like sort of predestination around kind of like, you're gonna, especially like neurally diverse athletes as well, who feel are very, very sensitive to their environments. It makes them sometimes incredible swimmers or goalies or things like that. Like sometimes these genetic sort of sensitivities actually make them outstanding at their jobs in sport. But in these states, like, what does an athlete look like? What does a person look for? Like, I'm not getting toned. Like, I feel soft. Like, I'm soft. I've got doughy muscle. Like, I can't seem to get like jacked. Like, I can't. Like, so your growth hormone and your testosterone are suppressed because of this level of cortisol. So now you can't. So imagine what most people think in that condition. I got to lift heavier. Okay, so now you're driving your cortisol higher. And then you're in this cycle, and then you're just like, well, I just can't figure this out. And so a lot of people, it's a sensitive topic, because there's professional, around coaches, strength and conditioning coaches, and all that stuff. Like, you can have an outstanding program. You can make a great program. It can be all, you've done your homework, you've come up with something great, but doesn't mean it's going to work. In fact, if the athlete's coming to the table and either it's environmental a systemic issue within the team, or they're coming to the table with a lot of other stuff going on, and you're like, you give them this program, you might crush them. It may go the exact opposite how you plan. So training sometimes really doesn't work. In fact, I found out that training a lot of the time doesn't work. And it doesn't mean the strength and conditioning coach, the physiologist, whoever, the team of people around them aren't really smart, haven't done their homework, haven't offered something great. There's maybe a lack of recognition in the busyness of whatever, or under-resourced or something, to be able to say,
The individuality.
we're not addressing their training adaptations, their rate of adaptation. Are they adapting on time as expected? If we know we can only physiologically peak however many times a year, I said 3, I think, in one of my previous things, physiologically we only peak 3 times a year. We've got to perform more than that. So lots of other ways to getting performance out of people, etc. Like, that's sort of my job, is to identify what are the other options. Like, we have so many other different ways you can improve. If you're always training to peak, always training, like, pushing the limits, like, there's a lot of things that people are missing programming wise, and they're actually sending their athletes in a downward trajectory. They're not coming out of those troughs, like supercompensation that we learn in school, in terms of they're not super compensating. They're not coming out of the trough. That's not happening. They're flatlining, and that needs to be tracked early in programming. Sometimes the problem with their performance is much later in the season, but it was a problem that started much earlier that people aren't tracking. Or an asteroid strike, something terrible happened and catastrophic, and you're doing well, but you just flip to the other side of things. And now you need that extra help and that support to get out of it. And how do you do that so your season isn't lost, or moreover, your career is not lost? So it takes slowing down and really seeing this and recognizing the athletes having the tools in their toolkit, the knowledge to say, okay, this has changed for me, and having an accountability framework of, like, at least it's your teammates or people around you. Hey, I'm getting doughy. I'm getting soft. I'm more irritable. I'm trying to eat well. And that's another thing. They can't help the cravings. Like, I've worked so long in the trenches with athletes where they're like, here's my diet. I know what I'm supposed to do. It's not like they don't want to do it. It's suddenly they're like, oh my gosh, you sneaked off to 7-Eleven and bought yourself a big, like a Slurpee. I don't know if you have Slurpees where you are, but you just were just like, basically a bag of sugar in a cup that's frozen, and you put Coke in it or something, right? Like, so, like, why would you do that? Like, sugar's bad and whatever. Like, I can't help it. And then they're mad at you, like, leave me alone. So I've had to be like, okay, so you're inflamed and you've got all these things. And then I've got so many athletes from this place that get SIBO. Like, I'm sure you're familiar with they've got bacteria, and they've got motility issues, so they're not, like, absorbing their fuel. So they can't even get the fuel in to override some of this energetic deficit. So basically, they're becoming malnourished out of this condition. They're eating and not absorbing their food. They're training and they're pushing their hormones down further and further into this sort of, quagmire of chaos. And so they need a lot of extra support and help. And that starts early, but sometimes, people find themselves in this place. So we're talking about retirement, but I'm saying the problem sometimes starts inside. And so the performance issues that lead you to have to retire early, that's a sad story unto itself. Like, it doesn't have to go that way in a lot of cases, but it's the now what that's important. And then another interesting perspective I want to offer is, sometimes when people are healing from like, they've gone on like this for a really, really long time, sometimes when they're healing and coming out of it, they get enough rest, they eat enough, they manage to settle down their gut, they'll actually see some confusing behaviors coming out of that people misdiagnose. Sometimes when they start to feel again, because they've been apathetic, they've gone really, really far down the road, and suddenly when they start to feel again, they have emotions, they start to feel angry, they're like, this isn't okay, I don't like this. That's healing. So some people are like, oh my gosh, we used to love this dude when he was so, like, chill, like nothing bothered him, but now he's mad and sad and whatever. And actually, maybe he's healing. Maybe we're reversing the trajectory. And so that's a recognition point as well. Like, I'm angry now because I was in such a suppressed state that now I'm actually getting, I'm starting to move towards homeostasis. You've got that, hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, this particular axis in the body that's like that basically tells you okay, you need food, you need to sleep, you need to do this is what needs to happen. And that loop gets overridden so many times where people are just like, forget that loop. I'm doing my own thing. And now your body's not functioning. Your body has an amazing ability to function and recover and do all those things. But when we push it beyond its limits and we override that with our own decision making, our body doesn't function, and that's why we need all this extra help sometimes. So sometimes when you a confusing part of coming out of training, when you've trained so hard, you've just been so to the limit, living on every supplement you can to keep going. Sometimes when you come out of that, there's this, and you start to heal, there can be those emotional things that are confusing, and they get misjudged as well. So there's a lot of discernment needed to where as to where someone's at, to have the swings be less profound, this training stimulus, like I said, or the life stimulus. So you're at least sort of dealing with some of the life change things, are to reduce the stressor response from the change, maybe to keep the load the same for a while. But you may find that you don't, eventually you don't want that load. You don't need that load. I mean, that you may evolve and change to, hey, I can get away with my 3 times a week cardio and I feel great. Like, I don't know if that's you, but I've seen that happen too. Yeah, thoughts? It's a lot of information.
Go ahead with some questions, Coop. Yeah, I
No,
can
I
tell
mean,
that.
I'm learning and hearing from you guys a lot, like all the stuff. Even now, the big thing, because Jay and I talked about it, because he's going through the retirement process now, and like now he's going into Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, right? And the reason he chose that is because of the chaos, right? And the stress level that it brings to him. And he's like, man, like I can't get out of the chaos. Like I don't know what to do without having that chaos. And I was like, man, I resonate with that, because it's the same with me. It's like if, and it shows a lot in how I work, because when in our gym now, like 4 or 5 o'clock rolls around, right? We probably have like 20, 30 kids that are in the class. We have 2 coaches coaching that class, and 4 other coaches that are coaching PTs, and it is chaotic in here, but I love it, right? That's the time of the day that I love, because it's like, okay, how much of this chaos can I make creative and like keep it still flowing, and then like make it competitive in a way that like people are still having fun and still doing their thing, and I'm still just like bouncing around. And when the days are slow, I'm like, oh man, like what do I do? And that comes like down to Sunday. Like when Sunday comes around and I don't have any work, or like I kind of have a slower day to where I go do my grocery shopping and everything, it's the times that like you feel that spasmness and you're just like, oh shoot, like I should be doing something, like something should be going on, or like when is something gonna pop off so I can get like that high and that adrenaline rush and like get to going. And then like and then I wait around till Monday comes. I'm like, yeah, cool. Now I can get back on the grind and like just like go, and like not knowing when or how to relax or let down. Like even for myself on the training load side, like I took a week off from really kind of like training hard, and I was like, man, I feel sluggish. Like, what am I supposed to do? But then I come back from it, and then my body feels great. I'm like, okay, like maybe that was needed in there, knowing how to deload and how to take the rest periods and not overdo it, because I'm not really training for anything now. But it's also like, man, I still live by the mantra of like, if I ask my athlete to do it, I should be able to do it myself too. But then there's also a level of like, some of these athletes won't be able to do it. Some of these athletes will also do better than I ever did, right? So then it's like, where's the balance, and how do you figure that out, and how do you understand like what your body is going through? And also like you guys talk about like putting like a like it's like put a name to it, like you have like a condition. Like most of us don't want to, like, don't tell me I have a condition, don't tell me like I have an injury, don't tell me like something's wrong, because like I don't want to think about that at all. I just want to keep pushing forward, right? Like, but if we just were able to kind of like step back and like see the condition that we're going through, understand what it is, and then like have a game plan towards it, it probably would help us in the long run. And you guys talk about it also with like the teams, like these big organizations, like having a plan and like being able to talk about these, like your nutrition, like the cognitive stuff, all that stuff. Like I don't ever remember visiting these things. It was just like, hey, like how can we get you on the field? Like you're gonna play well, you're gonna do well today. If not, like somebody else is like they're willing to fill in your position. And I think that also is such a huge driving factor for us, like it's guys like Jay and myself, like in the chaos, because we're so used to just like striving in that. You're like, all right, if I keep it chaotic, I'll find a way to get out of it. Like I'll be okay at the end of it. And it's just like procrastinating. Like I'm very good at like procrastinating, even when it came down to school. Like if I keep this paper to the last minute, like I'm most likely going to get an A or a B on it. Whether if I plan for it and I actually do it ahead of time, most of the time I get a C on it. Right. So I was like, well, shoot, just procrastinate. And when I get into chaos, like I feel like I write my best. And then that's the same way, like it kind of is with life for a lot of us that come out. It's like, how chaotic can we keep it? But then there is a crash point.
I would actually love to comment on that because, of course, and obviously, you're not necessarily going to need or be able to have the same amount or level of chaos. I mean, you have been used to it, so obviously that's the most familiar, that's the addiction part of it, that I'm used to this because this is where I know I thrive in that. But when you mentioned the part about then you get to Sunday, you don't really feel any dopamine kick or anything, that is usually when I put my athletes that I work with who struggle with that, because a lot of athletes in general, they struggle with allowing themselves to not necessarily be at a high all the time. But because of course you're not 20 anymore, you're not supposed to go into a higher amount of putting yourself into hard work and putting yourself into more stress. So that's when the balance comes in, because you want to maintain some level of it. You want to maintain the part where you actually feel good because it is familiar, but you also want to maybe slow down a little bit so it is actually more healthy in some sense, and you can burn off that stress level. But when people are in that part of the week, or those parts of the week where it's going to be less chaotic, it's going to be less exhausting, it's going to be less challenging, I usually use that as a phrase of putting my athletes into a challenge. So how about you challenge yourself for being in the opposite? And that is very challenging because you are competitive. So it's like, oh shit, yeah, now I got a challenge. I got to keep my calm right now. How do I do that? Because what you got to understand is that serotonin and dopamine, which is obviously the dopamine that we get addicted to because we keep pushing, we keep thriving, we keep pursuing something that we want to have. So that is obviously what we get addicted to. But those two cannot use the same pathway. So that means also that you might have less serotonin release. And at the end, or sometime when you don't have enough serotonin, that is when depression will be knocking on the door, or anxiety or frustration. And especially also if you genetically are not necessarily wired to have a high level of serotonin. So there might be a lot of challenge in that if you don't train yourself to be opening the door to the serotonin. So by understanding and knowing that, I say, okay, this is Monday to Friday. I love when there's this high pace, but Sunday is my deliberately, I'm going to be quiet with myself. I'm going to not have super much in my head all the time. I'm not going to achieve a lot of things. I'm actually going to put myself into a challenge by doing the opposite. And you will experience a great deal of positive energy, not just the thing that you're used to in terms of surviving, cleaning up in a whole chaos and everything. You will definitely feel that balance of you getting used to also having the opposite. So don't always have to be chaotic, because like Tara said, you cannot peak all year. And from now on, your athletic performance is going to be a whole year, or your non-athletic performance. You are going to be in a whole year. So how are you going to put yourself into not trying to peak every single day? Because that is when you're going to collapse. That is when you expect that of you. So by putting a new kind of training into your daily routine, which would be, okay, today I actually need to calm my mind. I don't need any stimuli. I just need to have my brain trained to be a little bit relaxed. I want my hormones to be relaxed, whatever that means for you, because not everybody necessarily loves to meditate, but whatever that means for you in the positive psychology toolbox, which could be just reading, it could be just going in nature without the 700 podcasts at the same time and everything, but doing the opposite of what you would do on a day-to-day basis. That would be my first, obviously, actually put people deliberately into that state, because it's super challenging for everybody. I mean, not even athletes, it's challenging for everybody to just be with themselves or be quiet. And if it's in 1 hour for you, then that's a lot to begin with. You know, you don't have to be extreme in terms of, I'm going to spend a whole week not training, not seeing anybody or whatever. That might be too overwhelming to actually do that. And also by cutting down on your training load, of course, that would also probably be more healthy, as I mentioned before Tara went on, when we talk about the professional NFL players right now. I mean, their body is completely like, it could recognize as well. They're at that part in the season where everything hurts. And of course, that is not ideal to continue in that, because again, you're not going to get any younger. So, but you still want to have that some kind of high intensity training, or even just cardio sessions a week and the rest is lifting or speed walking, whatever. Even fun play could be football, tennis, or whatever. But have that in, but it's still on a completely different load than you're used to. But it's enough for you to keep balance, keep you healthy, and burn off a lot of these bad hormones that we actually want to keep in balance. So that would be definitely something that could be mentally something that when you do retire from a high level of performance, that you try to put a new plan in, which is the physical part, stay healthy. And I don't mean not being injured. Like I know you say in American football, you're healthy if you're not injured. That just rings all the red lights in my head, like, wow, it's nothing to do with that. So be healthy in terms of maybe that shouldn't, maybe if you haven't done it until now, been putting any attention to your diet, maybe now is the time to actually even take better care of your health. Because again, from now on, from when you retire and going forward is actually when your body's going to respond, like Tara described really well. So now is actually maybe your time and your opportunity to say, okay, what do I need as a minimum? I'm not saying go extremely vegan or whatever fancy diet somebody would prefer. I'm just saying maybe you should start putting attention into that, because at the same time, when you do cut all the training out, there will also be some weight issues. Maybe if you just start eating tons of food that you weren't able to before. And by that, obviously also will affect negatively on the gut microbiome. And the gut microbiome is completely connected to the mental state, the mental health, with the serotonin production, which is actually 90% of the serotonin released in the gut. So maybe see that as an opportunity for changing chapters. You still want to be physically active in whatever feels good, whatever you find joy in. It could be completely different sport, but also add that extra level of it, which is I'm going to take care of a different kind of recovery from my mental state and my physical state, which could be, okay, I challenge myself to begin with 1 hour at least to begin with, where I'm going to be completely calm. I'm going to have a completely dopamine detox, which means silent your mind, wall staring or whatever you feel like doing. And that I actually might feel better than you would expect it to do, or you feared that it would. And then you just increase that a little bit. And then like the third thing would be, maybe you should look into your diet, get it a little bit healthy. So you at least focus on these plans. And I'm pretty sure that just by putting a new attention to what you want to look like or be like in that new coming chapter when you retire from ball, then that in itself could also hopefully create some curiosity, because it's also about, I have this purpose, I have this passion, and now it's gone. What now? So maybe that could be something else within that could be opening up some curiosity for being your best self in whatever's going to come, because I don't think it comes from you shut one door and then you enter another. I think it's a long transition that also the individual needs to kind of accept that right now I'm in between. I'm getting to learn how it feels like to not be in what I'm used to knowing myself as. And then also wait for the impulse for doing something. I'm not saying wait a year, but maybe you need to do something. You maybe need to help out somewhere. Maybe you need to have a job, but don't expect your passion to all of a sudden show up. And that new passion, whatever that would be about, maybe you want to write a book, maybe you want to do something you never imagined. But for most people, that doesn't show up overnight. So that's also an acceptance of processing.
Yeah, I agree. Do you have comments on that?
Mm-hmm.
I have a thought about that just too. I'm going to appeal to your training side, your strength conditioning coach side, Coop, and just kind of say, because you've worked with athletes, as a coach yourself for however long, right? And so that training doesn't work without the recovery, and recovery is as important as the training. It has to happen, otherwise training doesn't work. I mean, just from a purely just like micro tearing of the muscle to like all the different things that happen hormonally when you train, you've got to recover so that you repair, right? So that is like a recovery is sacrosanct. So there's I've dealt with a lot of athletes in their sport that refuse to, like they're like, I need to be training all the time, and so they're eventually just wasting away in a number of ways. So I've started to have to I in my training plans, and I still keep physiology is physiology to me. Like even when people retire, they've got mesocycles, microcycles, they've got a general prep macro, they've got everything you put in a yearly training plan. Deloads, like all of it. I don't train anybody that I work with any different than I train the best athletes. I do it the same, and physiology is physiology. I mean, obviously the exercise selection and things like that is very different, but in terms of the trajectory of training, it's the same. So just like you would put in a weekly cycle how much rest you would have, like that's sacrosanct. Without it, you're not gonna be able to lift again. You can't do legs again. Like you're not going to do legs on Tuesday and not, if you do them on the next day, you know what's going to happen. You do them the next day, you don't know what's happening. You need 72 hours. Like how many hours do you need before you can be able to train legs? Or if you're running a lot, maybe you're only doing legs once. Like, intellectually, you've been an athlete, you've experienced it, you've trained people, you need that recovery, right? So it's the same. It's identifying, to keep it really simply with retirement, because I don't believe it's there's not a one size fit all plan for everybody, just like there is for athletes. You can give the training plan, but there's going to be nuances within that program for each athlete. Identifying where an athlete is at when they retire, however they retire, is really critical to deciding the next steps. Just like you would do as an intake assessment. I'm not going to get someone squatting under a bar when they can't even get off off the chair. Like that makes no sense. So it's the same thing. Like, you're going to do an intake assessment of all your athletes and go, okay, what are you capable of? Like here, what are the metrics of success that we're out for, but what are the basic movements that you need to be able to master to squat properly? What do I need to have you do so you can run like this? Like we all spend so much time looking at that. It's the same mentality when you're retiring. It's like, okay, so where are you at? So what are you finishing with? So, dealing with offensive linemen, I mean, like, I got to lose this weight. Like, it is like crushing me. I'm so tired of being this big. Like, most people don't just naturally become, are that big. They have to work to get that big, to be that, And so now it's like, how do I come off of that and come down from that to what is, a healthy weight? And how do I do that in a way that isn't going to cause a lot of other health issues? So they've got a plan. You in your position in football, like where are you at? Is everything hurting? Is everything sore? I was like, what is your sort of particular trajectory? Are you still relatively healthy? I see the way you lift on, I see you on Instagram. I'm like, okay, so the guy can still do that. Okay, so his program, what I would say for him would be that you would keep going. If you're healthy and you're not experiencing things, like you've got to keep going with that sort of stuff. You may have some elements of where you've got to actually rest. Like, so for some people, they've got to come out of there and they have to rest. They have to, because they can't go on to the next thing safely. They can't train safely. They can't go to work safely. There's a lot of things depending on the level of crushing. So it needs to be an individualized outtake assessment and a new sort of life intake assessment as to what's next for these athletes. That's got to be something that's a call to action, like right away. And to make sure that there's a particular training plan for the athlete, depending on where they're at, exactly how you do it day to day in your job. Exactly, right? So, that seems fundamental. Like, why aren't we doing that? I don't know. Why aren't we doing that? What is that sort of retirement, like, sort of like, where am I at? Like, what do I need to deal with? Like, and then depending on that, the recovery period, let's call it recovery or regeneration or whatever it is you want to call it in your training language. Like, it's different. There are different things, recovery and regen, like there are different processes a little bit. You got to come up with a plan. So athletes will need that plan and that assessment as to where they're at. And then the training to maintain or to kind of come out of whatever won't call it a condition. Just think of it as training and performance. So in my mind, performance is a universal construct. What do you need to perform well now? What do you need to perform well, like in this next chapter? How do you get yourself into a place of readiness to do that? So at least you have the opportunities. So another thing, like you didn't know you had the opportunity to be a pro football. I don't know your journey from how it started, but a lot of people don't know they're capable of that until they start, I don't know, training, going out and catching a ball, like running a route. Like, how does anybody know where they're at unless they start doing it? So you've got to be in a position of readiness, physiological readiness, to even be able to have the opportunity present itself to you. So say, as we talked about, second chance sports like bobsleigh, skeleton, you got to, like, how do we know? Like, you're still ready. I can sort of I can guess, but you've got to be able to be like, okay, where am I at? What do I need to do? That's how you think. So how do we, help people think that way? Okay, so next chapter, I don't know what's available. Like, I've got to be healthy, well, safe. I don't know, in all things. I've got to be ready to say I got called again. Someone needed me to play. Am I ready? Like, so that mentality is always something that I would encourage athletes to keep, because that's that's how you lived your life. You've got to be like, I got to be ready for the next thing. So reframing it for yourself. And in some cases, that may mean a lot more rest and recovery for some to dig out of that hole and to start to heal. For other, and if they kept going at that rate, they may crash. For others, it is like, I got to keep going like this. And so, yeah, and come out of it more slowly, or if I'm going to come out of it, if I'm ever going to come out of it, like, because I know athletes, I'm older. Like, I've watched athletes come out of pro sport and continue to do incredible things. Like, that's the journey you want, to keep doing things, whether they're an amazing pickleball player or they're running marathons or there's something, they can still manage to be as healthy and participate and do a lot of different things. That's the dream, right? So it's an assessment that's needed. So I can't speak to it. It should be the same, but I can appeal to the common sense of, as a training person, as a coach, you need the recovery. So, or the training doesn't work. So how do we apply that to sort of a scaled life thing? Like, what do you need when you exit? Okay, so do we have all the tools in the toolkit right now to exit in a healthy way? Okay, community, because all of those things have a physiological cost. The rejection has a physiological cost. I'm not with my team, it has a physiological cost. Like, I've been spending my life doing the load calculations essentially for what is the physiological cost of being a varsity athlete? What's the physiological cost of being a pro athlete? That's how I've worked my whole career, is like, we got to look at that cost, and then we've got to adjust training, recovery, diet, everything around it to make sure that we still end up in the same place. Because especially if you live in a competition mindset, competition doesn't wait for you. You can't push back the Super Bowl because you're not ready. You can't push back the Olympics because, oops, you didn't taper enough, or something. We've got to, as people that help athletes, we have to jimmy their physiology sometimes to get them to that place. When I say jimmy it, I mean sometimes you've got to do things to get serotonin to come up. Sometimes, honestly, for people, I deal with ADHD. I have that diagnosis myself. If you couldn't tell, I'm all over the place with sometimes the things. I've got thought here, thought there. I'm going over here. I've got cooking, I'm cooking something over there. Like, I'm that same person. So I live it. I understand it. I have a son like that. And so with athletes that go in on a way to travel the world, they've got, with the bobsleigh that I'm involved with in Canada, like, they're in Skelton, they're all over the world right now in some pretty strange places. They can't get the food that they normally would get. They can't get the training environment they normally get. They're squatting with each other on their back sometimes. They're finding all sorts of creative ways to get food. So they can't have the perfect diet. They can't have the perfect conditions. That's competition. You got to learn to perform anyway. You got to perform on demand. You've got to figure that out. So sometimes you can't have it perfect. So there's no way they can. Sometimes the stuff they're eating, sometimes because they can't access what they normally have, is super bizarre for them. We come up with tools to sort of sometimes we have to compensate for that. Like, and they go away with toolkits. The ones that are really sort of dialed in will go into their own toolkit. When they can't get away from their teammates that are annoying, they get away by putting on headphones and listening to music. They download things on their iPads to boost their serotonin, sometimes so that they can focus. Like, sometimes it's like, I got to look at these pictures of flying birds for a while, or waterfalls, or something happy. I've got to go pet a dog. Like, sometimes, research with ADHD kids has shown that every 40 minutes, if they can't focus, they get up and pet their cat, watch a funny YouTube video, something like that. It gives them enough of a spike of serotonin to go and study and get another 20 minutes of quality cognitive, performance out of them. What am I saying? There's a lot to this journey. And so I think it's first of all, understanding that in these physiological states of the cup being over full, like, all sorts of behaviors are possible. You could do the most outlandish things. And I've seen it, and I've been a part of hey, that person doesn't need to be suspended from sport. They really are not a total jerk. They are going through this. Watch what happens when we get them rested, recovered, and whatever. They'll be like, what happened? I don't even know. And a lot of them are like, what did I say? What did I do? And especially for sports that are like pushing the envelope of like testosterone to the limit, like bobsleigh, sliding, football, where you're hitting, you're punching, and whatever. I mean, you are riding that line so darn close that at any moment you could punch a wall, right? So training takes you there on purpose. We just need to know when to pull you back so you don't go over the cliff. I'm saying that awareness and understanding of this is important. Recognizing that you can, in these particular cases, you can be present in lots of different ways that are not about you. They can be about the physiological state. You need help and support around you to help identify where you're at. The plan is not a cookie cutter plan. And so for every athlete that's watching this right now, they need to be able to understand and identify, like, the symptoms I presented earlier. Am I in that state right now? Okay, so I do need some rest. I do need some support to help me get to a place where I can even make a decision that makes sense. Because sometimes you're in a state where there's no freaking way you're going to be able to make a decision that's rational, because you're cognitively so just like all over the place because of wherever you are hormonally, neurochemically, all those things, right? So it's like, recognize that and be like, maybe it's a quick fix. Maybe it's 3 days of eating this or doing this. And sometimes it is that simple. Sometimes it's a little bit more of a chronic situation, but that recognition is the first thing. The management of that is the first thing, and making sure you're around people you trust and you have resources to say, hey, I'm feeling like this. Does it mean I'm done? Does this mean I need this? Does this mean I need that? Like, you've got, like, the two of us sitting here right now, like, ask us, like, this is what this means. Okay, like, try this. You may feel completely different in 24 hours. There's all that, but I'm just, for you personally, I'm appealing to your kind of common sense as a strength coach, right? Like, what does recovery look like for you, and your goals to continue to stay as fit as possible? Amazing. Obviously, you got to recognize things like tissue pliability is going to be a bit different as you get older. You're not going to be able, just based on aging. Your demands on you are going to be a bit different. You've got a daughter. You've got other things to consider. You've got, you're not full-time athlete where you don't have to maybe think about some of those things, or full-time athletes that have to think about putting food on the table, managing a family, being a good, husband or wife or whatever it is. Those things, those are extra stressors, and training needs to look different to make sure that you come out of it on the other side. I think, recognition is first, and then sitting down to identify, like, an individual needs assessment is critical right out of the gate. And then the training stuff, I mean, that's the thing that you need to, depending on where someone's at, their training stimulus needs to be adjusted. And so for you, maybe it's that you need to train the same right now. I don't know. I suspect you do, but you also appealing to the fact that you need to, the recovery piece, like, of course that's necessary. You're not going to adapt to the training. For you, you may need to have set goals and performance goals. They may not be the same as you have for football right now, but they may be benchmarking so that you can get to a particular thing by a certain time. And then you reverse engineer that like you would a training plan. When you know your competition is here, you got to reverse engineer all the mesocycles, right? Living like that is something that I encourage a lot of athletes to continue to do. We got to come up with goals, even if the goal is, I want to run 5K in this little race, so I got to train for that. Like, that mentality, I think I don't encourage people to get rid of that, because you need that structure of the planning and the training and the goals and the whatever to keep you in that optimal state. And you're so attuned to your body, knowing what it is like when it isn't there, that you need that structure in a way. Regardless, even if it is, for some athlete, it's just completely rest for a while, you still need that to be structured rest with a set objective. I'm all for the athletes coming out of retirement for a whole pile of reasons I've described, needing to stay on a training plan with that kind of, this is what your lift looks like this week, this is what your energetic stuff looks like this week, this is your recovery plan, that's sacrosanct, you're taking this day and this day off, you're doing what Georgie says, this is what your nutrition plan looks like. You need that because you're used to living like that. Why would you abandon that? That will help manage a lot of the symptoms so that you can perform your best. And you need metrics to help you figure out what that performance looks like. Otherwise, you don't know. So do you go around a 40 every so often? What do you do for you to kind of, I don't know, what would you do?
Oh, nowadays, I mean, I'm testing out the knee after getting the stem cell treatment back in. So I'm going back on what I did for my NFL training days. I'm seeing what my combine times were and everything like that. So now I'm like kind of retesting that stuff, and seeing where I'm at. Obviously, things aren't going to be the same. Right? I'm not going to run a 4.3. It's not going to happen. I'm not going to jump 40 inches. Like, it's not going to happen. But I want to see where I'm at with things and kind of see what kind of build up to again. This is competitive way of myself, and then also with my coaches here. We're setting this, and like for us, it's like we're gonna have a staff combine day. right? So we're all going to see where we're at, right? And all my coaches, well, one of the coaches my age, everyone else is in their 20s, right? So you got guys that are just getting done playing. And so now it's like, all right, well, I'm going to show the young guys like, hey, like you're still trying to catch up to me. Like I'm still the big guy here, but it just gives you something else to work towards. And on top of that is also making sure, like I said from the very beginning, is that all my coaches are eating well, you know, and they're getting good paychecks, and they're on the sales side of things. Like I'm making sure the gym is still running well. So that side of things, I kind of keep competitive because I know that's what's going to drive me. The struggle is always going to be Sunday for me. Now, right now, football's going on, so there is some way to for me to relax and be able to sit back and watch it. The hardest part is when football season is done. Like, yeah, I know Canadian football's going on, and now we got the spring league going on too. But it's not the same as like when college football's going on. Like you got Saturday, and then you also got Sunday, and then you got Monday night. There's also Thursday night games, sometimes Friday night games. So only Tuesday and Wednesday, I don't have to worry about no football. But now playoffs are coming for college, so college football is about to end. And NFL is going to end eventually soon. Not a big NBA fan, so that doesn't really excite me. So yeah, the Sundays are going to be a hard part. And now hearing like, hey, challenge myself on how to rest is going to be huge for me because, it just makes me, like you said, it makes another challenge. It's kind of like, it's a dopamine challenge, but also you're working on the serotonin side. So it's something that I can implement on for myself. It's not that like I'm going to change the structure of like, hey, I wake up in the morning, I go to the grocery store about 7, 8 o'clock. I get all that stuff done just because also I don't want to be around that many people that don't know what they're doing in the grocery store. I have my list. I follow that, right? I get in and out of the grocery store. I don't want to be there with all the crazies in the middle of the day and the afternoon that loaded up their cart and half the stuff they're not even going to eat. Right? So I get my grocery shopping out of the way. So just having that structure and then knowing like, hey, afterwards, like, bro, just relax. Like, let go of things. Like, just let it be what it is. Like, it's still going to be there for you on Monday. Like, handle that stuff then is going to be a very big part for me. And I think this also leads us into our next episode of talking about how teams can help, planning out this plan for afterwards and like seeing, what other athletes have gone through. And then how to help out the next athletes that's coming around to that retirement stage. Because I think it's a big thing that nobody's touched on yet is how to help the guys, come into retirement. And that's something that we're all struggling with. And a lot of us athletes, I think athletes now are coming out and speaking about it. But there has to be some ownership, like you guys talked about, put on the teams. Because like teams are asking us to go out there and perform really, really well, right? And yes, some people get paid a lot of money. Some people don't get paid as much. Right, but there has to be some plan afterwards because like these are people too. So how can they help the athlete even more? I mean, and then at the end of the day, I think if you have a plan to help them even afterwards, you'll see even better performance from these athletes because they know that you actually care about
Yeah, 100%. And I think that's a huge, yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to add on that what you all both said before in terms of still having a training plan, still creating some goals for your physical performance. I would actually add on to that because I think it's also important that all of a sudden you do have a new perspective on what else is going to be occupying your time in life, which is more on the psychological part maybe, but it's also about, the small goals that could say for the next month, I want to have a goal for this. Again, we're going to talk into a little bit about the competitive gene in that, because again, you still want to achieve something. So it's not going to be like one day takes the other and you're like, God, I'm still not progressing. I'm not getting anywhere. And where the hell am I going to end in all this retirement phase? So just by having tiny goals that you have to accomplish, which is not about training because that's the thing you're used to doing, but there's still loads of hours as well, which I usually talk about. There's 80% of the time is not about the training. So what are you going to put into those 80 hours? How are you going to feel? How do you want to maybe develop or even maintain or nurture your social life, which could be with yourself. It could be with your spouse, your friends or whatever. Maybe there's a new area you haven't actually been working on and putting attention to, which would also obviously make you feel something. And what would that necessarily make you feel? Well, that would make me feel that I'm, taking care of my closest relatives again. It would make me feel proud. It would make me feel happy because I'm at least also taking care of other people or whatever that might look like. So I think the other part of training that you're used to is suddenly probably what would also confuse most people, because all of a sudden that's going to show up as a lot of time. All of a sudden you need to fill that out with something else. So I think to create goals, I love that as well. Like Tara said, I think it's super important to always have some goal setting. which could be, let's say this year, I might want to accomplish something, but what do I actually want for this month? What do I want to put my attention to, my effort into, and my hard work into? Because I want to maybe grow in that process. I want to know myself in the new settings. I want to know myself as not being professional or even being an athlete anymore. So what does that look like? What do I want to feel? Who do I want to give that to? So create a little journal on that, because I think that's super important. And then you can actually chug it into smaller bites. So this week, that means I have to put attention to this. This is my daily intention for this day. So just by doing that, you will still have the feeling of having accomplished, having succeeded. Because the other thing that could be knocking on your door could be the feeling of failure, because you're not an athlete anymore. You're not with the team and everything. So by then, you might also have a feeling of you are taking control, you're taking charge of that new chapter and that new ongoing story of your life. So I just wanted
And
to
I
add
agree.
that on that.
And I approach it, I love what you said there, Georgina. I approach it from a bit of a different perspective, just because maybe it's because I lived with I was married to a pro athlete for a very long time. And so I helped the whole transition and the training and whatever. So I understand understand, I guess I live with the mentality in my house 24/7, really. From that perspective, it's fueled a lot of my plans for athletes after, um, and my research, which is actually on extending sport life and building the Tom Brady's out there. Like I've been working on that for a really long time and feel like I have a formula and that's worked. And I've been able to prove it now. It's taken a really long time to prove it, but I've kept people in sport at a minimum of 10, well, usually 10 plus years at the pro level and finishing better than they started on their own terms. I've started to create a bunch of, I've got enough data to show that I've been able to do that. And it's come from, I'll give you sort of one thing is the plans that have worked for those athletes. And are you familiar with yearly training plans? You know what
Yeah.
they look like? So,
No.
but the ones that have really been beefed out and work really well are the ones that where we include, the competitions in there that are desired. And we have very, very fulsome, the physiological stuff, remembering always that everything else feeds the physiology. You got a job you don't like and it's making you really mad, you don't like your coworker, it's affecting your physiology. Like everything comes back to the physiological response to it. So the really, really good plans are having very tight cognitive tactical goals, technical goals. You're planning for all of it. And in all of that, your lifestyle, your social, emotional, everything is in there because it all comes out and affects the physiological outcomes, the speed, the strength, the everything. So I've I've done these I call them performance reviews, tongue in cheeks, as to looking at opportunities to improve that for life, for sport, for everything. The plans that have worked the best for athletes and kept them longer is when we factored in family, we factored in the social group, emotional part, we factored in who their community is, we factor in the job and the sources of income and where they're going to get that. We factored all that in, because if we don't, that ends up being the limiter of performance for people in their sport. They don't have that dialed in. They're not showing up to practice to be able to practice and do what the coach said. They're not able to execute on the strength and conditioning plan. So we have to factor that in, and we have to assign a physiological cost to it. It's a load calculation. I had an incredible supervisor in grad school, the first time I was in grad school, who worked all over the world in Olympic sport and had like so many medalists, so many Olympic medalists. And the way he taught us out of the gate was we had to make a plan that calculated load. And load calculation was total physiological cost of living in this environment and how we were going to manage that. And then we managed that, and we learned to manage that as students and in our careers down to the last millisecond. And that meant a big investment in looking sometimes into people's social lives. It looked like, I remember his story, being at the Olympics and two people were dating, and oh my gosh, for their cortisol, do we keep them together? Do we let them talk? Do we separate them? Because anything was they're riding so close to the performance line that anything on a given day could throw them over the edge the other way. Because when you're programmed that tightly to perform on demand, it is literally sometimes down to those things, like make sure that we keep the dating people happy if they're dating on the team, if they happen to be like make sure that the angry mother-in-law doesn't call the day of the competition, like, because all of those things drain your tank. And so we plan for all those things. Like, can everybody do that? No, but there's recognition of what what is the physiological cost of the life you're living right now, Coop? Like, what are the things that are you have to do? What are your have tos? Things you got to do, and what are the things you'd like to do? And then we make a plan around that, which is really how it's planning for optimal performance, being your best, essentially. Reframe it's for planning for being your best. So I've learned to make those plans where we've literally talked about, like, and a lot of the advice is mom advice. Don't hang out with those bad friends. They don't like you for you. They're not there. Like, I honestly feel like most of the time I'm talking to athletes and I'm like at the same time looking at their stress hormone. Okay, well, who are you hanging out with? Well, I've got these people that are whatever. They're always mad at me when I succeed. They undermine me. They pick on me. They're whatever. Okay, well, we've got to get new friends, like people that really like you for you and support you for who you really are and are excited for you when you are successful. They're the ones that are cheering for you and they're there pulling you out of the trenches when you're not. Like, those are the people you need to be around. And when I found the social stressors are often the worst for performance. They're the ones that have the most huge consequences. So it behooves people to spend time with, like, a lot of times talks I do to teams are, who are you hanging out with? You've got to start selecting like the social part. It's a big thing that I'm telling my son right now. He's dealing with he'd hate me talking about this right now. He's a, competitive swimmer and he's got a girl issue. And boy, oh boy, did that derail swimming. And he didn't he didn't peak at this big swim meet this last week and had unfortunate results, and he's super down on that. And so it's like, okay, so how do we support him? What does he need? The cost of that was enormous. So how do you plan right now for, because I appeal to you, because you're not gonna change. You're always gonna want to perform well. That's how you've been wired. So it's you almost maybe some people would think this isn't the way to think, but I'm like, you need a YTP. And we need to sort of come up with, like, all right, so what are your goals? What are your physiological peaks? Let's find 3 of them. And what are you going to train for? And it maybe the percentage of, like, what you were saying earlier, Georgie, was like, the percentage of your time in the actual physical training may be different because now you're switching to building a business or whatever. But ironically, you still got to be incredibly physically fit to be successful. You've got the fittest people, are the most successful. They can think they're the last person standing, the last person who on the field is the person that gets the most time on task. So those people that are super fit work into their 80s if they want to work into their 80s. They keep going in with their careers. They can still do that. I've used that approach for me, and I still play football. I still quarterback a team. We just won the equivalent of your state championships. We just did it in provincials in Canada. I'm old. I can still throw a football, but I'm competing with people almost half my age. I still throw, like, I took up, I was a throwing athlete before. I've taken that up now, and I'm still challenging myself to throw as far as I did however long ago. And I can still do it. Now I have to train differently to do that. But it's something that's important for me as a metric of, like, that's my benchmark for me. I got to be able to still do that stuff, or at least get close to it, because that's my plumb line I drop for myself. If I can still do these things, I know that I'm in a state of physiological, sort of wellness. And if I'm not able to do those things, something's gone off the rails somewhere. And so for me, that's a metric for my success. And so for athletes, that's all you've measured your life against. So what can we do to plan for you to still be able to do that, so that you're not slipping into couch potato land and are well into your 400 pounds. I've dealt with a lot of people that are 400 pounds after sport. They haven't been able to find a plan that allows for them to be healthy. And you've had the blessing of that being something that you focus on all the time. That's huge. How do you leverage that now? So this is, there's a lot to talk about in terms of what that looks like practically day to day, but I challenge people to state that in that mindset, the goals may be different, but the health metrics need to be the same, so that you can think better. You can finish that. If I'm not healthy, boy oh boy, like, I'm not making great decisions at work. I'm not making great decisions about my social life. I'm not making great decisions, or so whichever comes first, the chicken or the egg, the outcome's the same. I'm not doing well.
And it's getting more important the older you get. That's the worst part of
Yes.
it. You think you can then allow yourself to do that? No, 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 no. You cannot afford to have a day without training. You can't afford to actually have days with bad diet. You just have the consequence immediately, which you probably didn't when you were an athlete. So it becomes more and more important to focus on these things. which is a
I
little bit
needed to be
ironic.
fitter. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Because I have so many people that I'm coming to me with menopause and things like that, and they're like, "Oh my gosh," and I look at what they're doing and trying to handle, and they've got this huge hormonal shift happening, but they're
yeah,
like, they're CEO of a company. They've got 4 kids that are all in sport, like hockey mom. Hockey is we say hockey moms here in Canada. There's a lot of hockey, and there's a lot of hockey in the U.S. too. But I mean, like the lifestyle of a hockey mom is like there's a lot that goes on with those tournaments and the travel and the cost and who's paying
of
for this
course.
and who's driving and on and on and on again. And so, and then, paying the mortgage, paying the bills, cleaning the house, like managing what's going on with their significant others if they have them, or like the responsibilities when you get older are so much more. And so that behooves you to be that much fitter. Like, and so you got to be super creative about how you do that because now, so, that mindset, I'm appealing to the athletic mindset. Like, you are so good at getting the job done and figuring that out and working within those things. Like, that mindset needs to be leveraged, and we just need to come up with a bit of a YTP that looks a bit different for you. And it still evaluates those same metrics in maybe different ways with the expectation of growth. Like, yeah, you're not going to run a 4.3 as you get older. Maybe you just don't have you know, maybe you can.
Maybe
For
also
me,
don't need to.
well, I'm somebody that doesn't break down shy away from a challenge. I'm always that person. People hire me to be like, I need to do the impossible. I'm like, yes, let's do the impossible. I love
Yeah, 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 I totally
I
agree.
just
I totally
I just
agree. But it could be that it doesn't drive you anymore. It's more my point of it. Maybe you want to do something else extreme because you can, but it's not necessarily the same measures that as you did have in your sport. But I totally
yeah.
agree on that. I hate to talk into realistic goals because I feel like it's putting a lot of limitation on yourself. Why not go with what is unrealistic, especially because you're getting older. Yeah, it's a bit
I
of a
work with a
puzzle.
I work with a group of people right now where we've actually sort of dubbed ourselves, what are we doing? Like think of duty of care for people as like a responsibility as a health, as a fitness healthcare provider. Like, you want to make sure people do things safely. And we've got a group of people that are doing things that are absolutely, when a person's running 10 marathons in 10 days, I just helped someone do the 250 K race in the Swiss Alps over 95 hours to get this done. She's 60 years old and she did it. She did it well, but she's also a lawyer and she's got 3 kids and she's got busy this and busy that. And if I didn't help her, she'd do it anyway. So it's kind of like this group of us. We sit around and we're two of us are physiologists. We're all strength coaches, and we sit around and we go, okay, well, Bob's going to do this anyway. So how are we going to help Bob do this safely and not blow up his life? And a lot of these people that are doing these extreme things, like
I
extreme
know.
athletes, they're in
Yeah.
their 50s and 60s,
Oh, yeah.
and they're doing
I have a lot
Ironmans,
of
and
those
they're
as well, where you just think, oh, so you're never gonna give up on having really massive. I have actually a triathlon, what's it called, from Ironman in Hawaii recently in October. He's 54, and he had cancer. First of all, he had blood clots in his heart. Every medical doctor he's been close to saying you have to stop, and he's like, why? I have never been more healthy, and obviously I'm the one making sure that the measuring is intact, so he's capable of doing this. But his numbers getting better and better and better every single year, and he's just getting older.
oh my gosh,
No one
well,
understands that.
one of my best friends in grad school, he has gone on to set the world record. He's older than
Mm,
me for the number of Xterra like Xterra one. And
mm.
he's older. He's like he's mid-80s. I'm wondering if it's almost the same person you're working with. He set the world record. He just won again, like another one. Like he just keeps going. And then there's a group of us, like science folks. I just ran into him the other day at university. We call him. He's nicknamed Dr. Death because his training programs were so crazy. But we really, the truth is, he saved athletes. He's the one I told you about who has so many Olympic medals. To a lot of his planning and around the load calculation, and so he's still like finding ways, like super interested in, okay, so if we do this, go to altitude, run at this, do this stuff here, we get increased plasma volume. So when you come down to this altitude, your tempo runs or your sprints or whatever are going to be that much better because we're going to build plasma volume. And we're always thinking of those advantages, and we're always trying to work. And he's still helping people. And a lot of these athletes are older and older and older. And like, let's test the boundaries because there's masters athletes out there, right? Like the
Yeah,
101-year-old
yeah,
hurdler. The 101-year-old hurdler. I need to be that person. Like,
yeah,
so
yeah.
It's that mindset that got you there that I honestly, it cannot be forsaken. Like, I really believe with my whole heart, like that's where the opportunity lies for people that retire. It's just cleaning up some of the where are they at, understanding, where they're at physiologically, which affects, so much around their behaviors. I mean, it is a bit of a chicken and egg, but at the end of the day, like when you're in this state, you are not often rational. And so making sure that they're getting the care after, and then leveraging some of that. What got you to do that? Some people are like, I never want to see sport again. Some
But
are
I
like,
would actually also like to challenge you, Coop, in asking you, like, what if you didn't call it retirement? What if you just called it changing path?
yeah.
Because I actually have a lot, like you mentioned before, Tara. I have, I think my oldest client at the moment, he's 76. And I started to work with him. I think that was officially, he still hasn't retired. He was from a CEO, he owned huge companies. And back then he was like, look, I'm never going to retire. So can you help me make sure I can maintain this level? He was a soccer player. He's still a soccer player. He plays tennis 3 times a week. He do cold swimming every single day. He do running in the morning. And every time I meet him, like once a year, he's like, oh, look, I've never been more fit, after we did this. Now I can play football 3 times a week and everything. And he's like, he's never going to retire. And that was his mindset. Why would I ever retire? I'm just changing job positions, but I'm never going to retire. And that's his mindset today. He's like, I'm going to train as much until the day I can walk, until the day I'm not here. He's still controlling. He's head of board in some football club. He's still super active. And for me, he's like my dream scenario of not retiring. So that could be just a challenge for you. What if you didn't call it retirement? What if it's
I
actually
agree.
just changing path?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think for a lot of us, why we call it retirement is just to really let go, because I think about my journey, my path, and it's been like since the age of 5 of playing football until like 32. It's like, okay, that's more than half of my life has been in this, in the game. So it's like, how do, and not that I want to ever close the door of saying that I was a football player. It's just like, how do you move on from it and go into the next thing without calling it retirement, and like in a good mental state. And also, like, all of us all want to walk away from the sport on our own terms, which a lot of us don't get the opportunity to do.
Yeah.
So I think being able to say retirement and label it ourselves, like, kind of gives us that justification of like, hey, we did it on our own terms, not that like the sport decided like it is our time to let it go. With such a sport like football, I know soccer, right? Like, you can go out and you can go play anytime. But with football, it's pretty hard to play at a high level for the rest of your life. Like, you can go to Europe, and you can still play in those leagues. Even in the States, like, you can go to the States and you can play semi-pro. There's also like we call it here in the States like the uncles that sit around at the barbecue and talk about like, well, back in my day I was like this, and like
20 years ago.
you know what I mean?
20
Like,
years ago.
So I think for us, like, like calling it retirement is just like a way for us to just be like okay with like, hey, that part, like at that level that we were playing with is done, and like we're okay with it. Not that we ever give up the mindset or the competitiveness or the edge that we ever had when we were in it. And like you say, Tara, like it's good to hold on to that. And I think I hold on to that for so long just because like you said, it's helped me get to a lot of places in my life and help me become successful in what I do because of that fire and that edge that you have, and not many people have, or that drive to kind of get to the top level. Because when you think about it, like, it's such small percentages. Like, even if you look at Olympians, like the percentage of people that become Olympians, the percentage of people that become professional athletes, like, it's ridiculously how small it is. But then like, and then you talk about metrics and they're like, well, shit, I just beat that metric. Like, you're talking about 1% of people. Like, I'm a 1%er that did that.
Yeah.
So I think we for a lot of us, we still hold on to it. We still keep that fire. It's just like we're talking about now. It's like, how do we use it to our advantage when it comes to this side of life? And I think that's the hardest part for all of us. Like, just thinking about everything we've said today, and then like what we're going into next, and what we're going to continue to talk about. Is just like continuing to use this passion, this drive, this fire, this edge that we have in a good way, in a way that it doesn't harm others, but it uplifts others. Because I think that, like, I only speak for myself. It's like, for me, it's like if you miss that team feel that, like, we're talking about metrics and like balancing things out. It's just like, how do I continue to use this in a team field to make sure that like everyone knows that it's like this competitive edge isn't against you. It's not like something that like is trying to harm you. It's like, hey, it's driven me to a point that like I've seen success from it. So like, how can I use this to help you too? To like see that like this edge like could take you so far.
Good
I
point.
agree. I like that, the barbecue uncle scenario. Like sometimes the barbecue uncle didn't have the exits from the sport that he needed, and wasn't well, and maybe didn't get on the path that he needed to because of all the things we were talking about. The value of what barbecue uncle did, or anybody was really diminished. And I think that's a big thing too, is to say like, okay, we talked about this earlier, and that's for another discussion, which can create quite the health challenges and contribute to this cup again of stress, right? Like we're just looking at it from a load. Is what I was doing valuable? Did it make a difference, or was it frivolous? Like some folks feel that sport is frivolous. It's just, you get to play now. Go over here now and be a real person. Like go over here. That is the most harmful language I've ever heard. And so it's there are a lot of reframing that needs to happen about what is that sport journey, like what does it mean. For some people it gave them an opportunity where they were to actually excuse me, go to university or something where they never would have been able to do so on their own terms. Had that sport not come along at that time, they were in a bad place. They would have never been able to have what they have today. And it taught them discipline, just like people who go join the military. It taught them discipline, hard work. It gave them a family. It gave them a purpose. It allowed them to meet and connect with people that they never would have been able to connect with. And leadership and all the incredible values that it taught them, leadership of self, leadership of others, like all that stuff. Like there's so many things that came out of that journey. And so like, how could anybody ever judge that journey as being frivolous when you learned how to look after yourself and learned how to get along with others and be coached out of it? So there needs to be a reframing for people that are retirement. Like, what are the positives that you learned from this? Now, how do we leverage those things to do something productive? And also, while people are in their career, how can you use that career to bless others? Like how can you inspire others that are maybe in a really down place, but boy oh boy, can they are they fast? Okay, so let's leverage that gift. You've been blessed with this gift of speed. Like what can we do with that, and put them on a journey that maybe leads them to go to university, where they find all of a sudden they get to go to medical school, or there's so many things that come out of the sport journey that need to be reframed in my mind. And not doing so leads people to become maybe bitter barbecue uncle that didn't get to live their sounds like that never got to live the life, a positive life after sport. And so all they have to hold on to really is some of those memories. Not that holding on to those memories is a bad thing, I'm not saying that either, but they weren't able to leverage those gifts and those opportunities, or didn't have the help and support to do that when sport was done, and they went off on a path that wasn't healthy for a whole bunch of reasons. Maybe they were physiologically crushed and suddenly fell into a bad place and had a really hard time coming out of it. So I feel in my own personal how I am trying to use what I know and my ability to see it is to help people in sport have the most positive, impactful journey they can, and make learn as much as they possibly can about themselves and bless others as much as possible. And then, help others actualize their potential and get every opportunity to do that, because so many people don't get that chance. So in sport, out of sport, whatever, like, it's the same thing. So I think we can do a lot of discussing around the reframing piece of it for a lot of folks that are way, way, way out of sport. Maybe it is barbecue uncle that watches this and says, you know what, like that was an incredible, I learned a lot there, and I'm going to take that now. And maybe 50 years later, but I'm going to do something with that, because boy, oh boy, sport taught me some incredible things, and I know how to work hard, and I'm going to reframe that, and I'm going to help others. And so this is maybe the whole altruistic philanthropic side of sport, but I really believe that it's an incredibly powerful tool to learn how to actualize performance, and and learn a whole pile of lessons along the way as to what people need to be successful. You don't need terribly negative friends. You don't need, this environment to be healthy and well. Like, so leverage that. What do you need to be successful? And let's help others do the same and pay it forward. So that's the mentality that I use in my career. I've been blessed to help a lot of people be successful. I'm going to keep doing that as best I can, and making sure that they don't get the wrong messages. Or if there is a chance they're just crushed in this way, let's get them fixed so they have an opportunity to do the next thing and the next thing. So I think there's lots of different paths that can be created from the sport journey, and give people choices as to which path they feel is best for them. And maybe that's something that comes out of this podcast, is sort of a call to action and a toolbox creation that we can give with our combined years of watching people fall and rise and do that many times over. What can we do? How can we lobby organizations to be better? How can we help athletes that are on the cusp right now of they want to finish on their own terms, do so positively so that they can either go on to a second chance sport or coach or create something that's really impactful using those lessons? Like, that's how I want to see it. And I think that that's a need that needs to be filled for a lot of folks. And in Canada, where sport is really, really underfunded right now, there's a lot of other challenges. That sport journey is something that people are really fighting right now to reframe and to make sure that, and like I said, there's some folks that if they weren't doing sport, I don't know they'd be in a great place. So they need it. So how do we repurpose this? I don't know if this is something that feels like it's my life's work to come, like as to how to figure this out. So I appreciate you giving me a chance to even talk about it, because it means so much to me. Let people have their chance, whatever that looks like. So thank you, Coop, for that. And just on a personal note,
Thank you guys so much for taking the time to actually talk about this stuff, actually creating this space with me for athletes, former athletes, coaches, and everyone else involved in this whole process. But we'll jump into it even more next time.
sounds good. Yeah, we
Thank
just
you.
keep sitting here filming. And see, the sun has risen behind me, and now it's dark. Like we're still talking. Okay, well, thanks.